Hi everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. My name's Steve. I'm going to take you on a 2-hour tour. So it's going to be for 2 hours. I'd call it a training course, but it's more of a tour. And what we're going to look at is network automation using Python. Something that we're not looking at that would be of interest if we had time would be using tools like Ansible. That would be something else. So we're just going to be looking at using Python to do network automation. A couple of things. We're going to go for about 50 minutes. And then after 50 minutes, we'll take a tea coffee break. I don't mind whether you take teas or coffees. That's entirely up to you. And also, if you've got a question, as Lindsay said, use the Q&A buttons and you can fire away questions. I'm talking to a blank screen here, so if you ask questions, that helps me, means I'm talking to someone. And fire exits, I have to tell you by law, but hopefully you know where your fire exits are. Anyway, what do I want you to get out of this course? I've got no idea and no time to find out from all of you what level you're all at. So I will tell you what Python is, but one of the key things I want you to take away from here is automation and what automation is, but also the difference is between using the CLI and the API. You may not know what they are yet, but well, this one's a command line interface, just in case. So we're going to look at automation using a command line interface. And if you're going to go away and you're new to network automation, that was probably the first step that you'd actually want to use, using the command line automation, command line interface. And then we're also going to look at using APIs, which we'll cover in a bit. One of the key things is there's something called libraries, and you're going to tell me at least 4 of those, or you should be able to tell me at least 4 of those by the end of the session. You may already be able to list some of those, but we are going to look at different Python libraries, including what they are. And then right at the end, after coffee breaks and towards the end, we will finish about 50 minutes from the end. So, and there'll be a QA at last 10 minutes. There will be a chance to ask any final questions, but do ask as we're going along. So towards the end, what I was saying is, I'll tell you what sort of steps you can take if you haven't begun network automation already. Right, using Python. So what is network automation? So in terms of network automation, what we're really talking about, or should be talking about, is configuration of devices. So although we can monitor and you can automate the monitoring and troubleshooting, I'd have to say that good old tools like SNMP, NetFlow, some of you may be using streaming telemetry as well. All of those are applicable, telemetry, and you can still use those. Yeah. So network automation, the focus really should be on configuration. However, if you start configuring devices right from the get-go, it can be dangerous. So the real fun of network automation is if you get your configuration wrong, you can bring down all the devices at the click of a button. It's quite funny when it happens to somebody else's site. So do beware, and the solution is test, test, test. I've got to say, make sure you test anything you're doing with network automation. Now, because of that, when you're beginners, beginners, I would recommend actually start with the network monitoring. Yeah, the reason being is when you're looking, it's harder to cause any problems on your actual network. So hopefully there will be some scripts that we'll be looking at here where you can actually monitor devices, etc. Yeah, okay. And you could take those scripts away and hopefully find them useful right from this afternoon. Obviously, as well, what we're talking about when we're looking at configuration, I'm not really looking so much at configuration of Linux servers or Windows servers. It's routers and switches that I'm really interested in. I know these are Cisco icons, but the libraries or the network automation we're going to be working with is vendor neutral. So I don't care whether it's Cisco, Juniper, Alcatel, whatever it is, everything we're doing would be applicable, more or less everything. One last thing, if you look here, there's a chicken and there's an egg. And the interesting thing in English anyway is which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't really mind, but what we're really saying is for network automation to work, there is a slight catch-22 that typically that you do need a base configuration already for it to work. So typically the base configuration will be an IP address. So you'll need an IP address on the device, you'll need a default gateway on the device, you'll need a subnet mask on the device, and so that's the subnet mask, and also you'll need a SSH configuration typically. So this is the base configuration, and what this is saying is it's often called day zero configuration, or using zero touch protocol. That's not covered here, so to speak. So the idea is there are techniques where you can unpack a switch, a router or whatever, plug it into its network, and it will build a base configuration. All the examples in this course are based on having that base configuration already put there, either manually or, you know, using a protocol such as ZTP or POPE or whatever protocol you're using. Okay, so what is network automation? Network automation really is automating the configuration of network devices. That's the key point there. And why do you want to use Python? So Python is a programming language, which is what it's saying there. And there is a, I don't know whether it's a company, but it's a lovely website. And one of the things is when you choose a programming language, there are loads and loads of different programming languages. So for example, some of you may already know C or Java or C++ or C#. What I've got to say is most network people, unfortunately, don't know any of these, which is absolutely fine. And what we recommend is that you use Python. Why do we recommend you use Python? Well, one reason is, according to these people, I'm not saying it's entirely accurate, but Python is the most popular programming language available in 2022, i.e. it's used by the most people, then C, then Java, etc. But the real reason that I would recommend using Python for network automation is be a sheep. And what by that, what I mean is everybody else does. Everyone else, not everyone, but most people use Python for network automation. So just follow the crowd. That's always the easiest way to go, I think. Yep. Okay, still no questions as far as I'm aware. So keep them going. When you write programs, the key thing is programmers often, when I was a programmer a long time ago, I always thought I could write the code better than somebody else, and you spend ages writing the code. But my advice is, if somebody has already written the code, and lots of people have, then use other people's code. That's what it's saying there. Sorry, reading off the slide there. So by using other people's code, in Python, what that means is you use their libraries. I think that's spelt wrong. I think it should be spelt like that. My spelling's not brilliant, but anyway. So use other people, use Python libraries. So a key thing is, when you're doing network automation with Python, you are going to write your own code, but use lots and lots of other people's code. And these are Python libraries. I'm going to be showing some demonstrations. What we've done a lot of is pip install. So pip install Netmiko, pip install napalm. These are example libraries. This is already being done on the machine that I'm demonstrating on. So if you're going to be doing any network automation, step 0 is you need to install Python if it's not already installed. But then step 2, or step 1, let's say, is you install the libraries. Yeah, this is where you're installing other people's code that you can then actually use. Yep. Right. What are the libraries that are available? The libraries are available. This is not a complete list. This is some of the libraries that are available. I would suggest that you don't use sockets libraries. This is too low level. This would be suitable if you were writing your own protocol. Your own protocol, which you're not likely to be doing. If you are, then you're probably more of a programmer than a network person. I'm assuming most of you are network people. If you remember, I said network automation can be monitoring, but really should be more configuration. There is a library called Easy SNMP. There's another one called Pi SNMP. I personally prefer Easy SNMP, which allows you to do SNMP from within a Python program. If you want to do telnet from within a Python program, then you will use the telnet lib. And that may still be valid. So like I said, some people have got tens of thousands of devices out there, let's say, where SSH isn't enabled, but Telnet already is. You might write a program using Telnet to then enable SSH to then allow you to use the Netmico library. If you're doing SSH on network automation, I would advise you use Netmico. Netmico then uses Paramiko, but it's unlikely that you would need to use Paramiko. So what these allow you to do is Telnet to a device or SSH to a device. So just as you would manually Telnet to a device or SSH into the device, you can get your Python program to actually do those. Alternatively, you can use an API. Yeah, and there are two APIs that you can use. And you could say that these are actually roughly equivalent to using a protocol, roughly, yeah. And the two protocols that you can use to perform network automation are either Netconf or RESTCONF. RESTCONF is actually based on the protocol HTTP, just so you know. So the library, if you want to do Netconf, is ncclient. The library, if you want to do REST or RESTCONF, is called the request library. Wherever I say HTTP, I'm not too worried about security. A lot of people are, so it can use HTTPS, obviously. Yeah, a library we're not talking about today is actually PyEasy. PyEasy actually does Netconf, but is written by Juniper for Juniper devices. Therefore, it's not vendor neutral. Therefore, we're not looking at it. But a very useful library is one called napalm. This is a library I like a lot. PyNTC I like, but not many people use it, so we're not going to cover it today. But it is an interesting library you could actually look at. There's one that is absolutely fantastic, which isn't on here, but I will be talking about, is another library called Nornir. So very basically, when you write a Python is a programming language, you can write your own programs with it. When you write your programs, rather than writing all your own code, use other people's code, and they come in the shape of libraries. All these libraries can be used within your Python program. So rather than you writing the code to do a telnet, yeah, you just use the library and that will do the telnet for you, as an example. There are many, many more libraries. This one's a really, well, all of these, even that one, I guess, and that one. This one is definitely worth looking at. So is that one after beginning, but this one we will cover. I can't remember where we're coming that one, but basically it does regular expressions for you. You won't know why that's useful yet, so we'll just skip on, but all of those are useful. There are more Python libraries that you can use. Yep.
Steve, we've got a question that's come in the Q&A.
Oh, lovely.
If you use a high-level library like, is it napalm, for example,
yeah.
do you need the low-level ones?
Yes, is the answer. So that's the simple answer. That's a good question. Now, what will actually happen is, if you do so to use napalm, as I said, you will do a pip install napalm, and napalm does use Netmico, in fact. Now, what will happen is with pip, it won't just install the library that you are after, it does work out the dependencies. So if you did a pip install napalm, it will install Netmico for you. Yeah. Hopefully that's answered the question. If not, do ask the question again, because I am partially deaf, so sometimes I miss it. But the question is, napalm is a high-level library, and it does use, so it can use, for example, or will use PyEasy. Yeah, if it's,
they've said it's answered the question. So
lovely. Okay, I'll move on then. Sometimes I tend to waffle. Sorry. Okay, excellent. Right, okay, so those are the Python libraries. So this slide is really important. So what you've got is a command line interface, or you've got an API. APIs are what Python really wants. So when you write a Python program, or you're using a Python program, what you'll find is there are two things that are really, really useful in Python: lists and dictionaries. Yeah, and if it's in a list or a dictionary, then Python can work with it really easily because it is a programming language. You personally may not like lists and dictionaries. They're not designed for you. They're designed for programs. Yeah, okay. So you may actually prefer good old, well, this example, Cisco, it's just an example. So what we're saying is you can use Telnet or SSH with the CLI. So here's the CLI. When I use the CLI, what we're actually going to do is send the actual commands. So in this particular case, I'm going to change the host name, I guess, of this device to become R1. And then this will save the config. This is a Cisco set of commands. Now, that is what using the CLI is. Now, because humans like this, or at least network humans, they're used to this sort of configuration. This is often the first step. So step one on your, well, step 0 is look, yeah, using Telnet and SSH. So by look on step 0, rather than doing enable conft blah, 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 you might do things like show a version on your devices or show IP int brief, whatever the commands are for your devices. Yeah, so step 0, if you're doing network automation, I thoroughly advise looking rather than changing. But step 1 would then be changing configurations, and you can do that using the CLI. And for example, most people will actually pick SSH. Yeah, okay, and that was with the Netmiko library that I discussed before when you're using Python. So what we're talking about is we're going to have a network automation server. Yeah, different companies will call those different things, but from our point of view, I'm vendor agnostic, so I'll just call it a network automation server. And what we're going to be doing is writing our Python scripts here, and our Python is going to do the Telnet or the SSH and use the configuration that way. The nirvana, let's say, where you want to be heading to, so they say, is to use Netconf or RESTCONF. And what you'll find is then, you'll find that your configs, rather than being done in the CLI, will be in either XML format or JSON format. Now, the reason we like these, you will not like these formats yourself if you're new to it all, but the reason we want them is they're very easy to get into Python dictionaries, yeah, or get dictionaries back into XML or JSON. Yeah, okay, so Python finds XML and JSON very easy to actually manipulate. Yep, okay. I think that's okay on that so far. I guess there's no more questions. Just one other thing, Yang is not what the configs will be written in. If you know XML, what you have are what are called tags. Yeah, okay. What Yang actually decides is what tags you can use in your configs. And the nirvana is, rather than having Cisco CLIs, HP CLIs, etc., we move to a standard way to do all our configs, so let's say XML. But the question is, what can we put in the XML? Well, it's Yang that tells us that. The one problem is, I would have thought that everyone would want to follow the IETF set of tags that you can do, the IETF set of rules, but you'll find that then Cisco have their own Yang models, and then Juniper have their ones, and then OpenConfig have their Yang models, etc. So unfortunately, it's not always going to be the same. Yep. Okay. Right. Sorry, something popped up there. Right, here's a bit of code. So this is what Python looks like. It can be quite shocking for some of you, but very basically, I'm going to talk through some of this code and then we'll try some of this code. Here's a couple of lines here. And if you look at this line, this says, both these lines say, use these libraries. And if you remember, I'm going to go back. Here we go. What I did say is telnetlib was the library to use telnet. So what we're saying is, in this piece of code, I want to import all the telnet library. And the reason I want to do that is what I'm going to do is create a telnet connection. So this creates the telnet session. Now, I'm assuming you're programmers. No, I'm not. I'm assuming you're network guys. Sorry about that. So what you should realize, what's going to happen here is a SYN packet's going to go across. I get a SYN ACK back, and then I do an ACK back for that, etc. All of that is being done with this one line here. What am I connecting to? In this example, I'm connecting to localhost, and the username and password are being stored. These are variables. Yeah, and these will be used later in the code. But my telnet session, so a common thing when you're using the libraries for network automation, you will end up with an object. Don't worry about object-oriented programming, but from now on, TN is representing my telnet session. So what I'm doing here is I'm reading TN write, TN read until, then TN, 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 TN. All of these TN lines are reading and writing from and to the telnet session. Basically, what I'm doing here is logging in. Don't get bogged down in the details, particularly since we've only got 2 hours. And then in this particular case, I'm doing an LS in Windows. That would be a DIR. Yeah, this is based running on an Ubuntu machine. And then I'm logging out. Yeah, okay. Now, what I've got instead of this, and hopefully you can all still see my screen, what I've got is a remote desktop into Azure here. And what I'm doing is I've got 4 routers for my network automation. I could have switches, all sorts. I've just picked 4 routers just to keep it simple. The addresses are 10.99.99, 11, 12, 30. These routers aren't actually real routers. These ones are actually running in EVE-NG. So what I'm logged onto here is a Windows 10 machine. The Windows 10 machine is running EVE-NG as a virtual machine in Hyper-V here. I do have an Ubuntu machine running. I'm not going to be using that today. I'm going to be using Python on Windows. It's not something I necessarily recommend, but if you're used to Windows, it can be quite a nice, easy way to do it. And I'm also using something called VS Code. So if you look here, this is VS Code. So VS Code is a nice editor. It's actually an interactive developer environment. It's not just for Python, but it does understand Python. And because it understands Python, it color codes all the text. If you look, line 1 and line 2 is exactly the same. The difference is I've changed this to be 10.99.99.11. But this is the telnet code that we were looking at just before on the slide, but here it is within VS Code. So I've got VS Code, which is where my code is, and I've commented these lines 5 and 6 have hashes in front of them. That's a comment. So in Python, what we can have are comments. Comments just say to Python, the Python interpreter, ignore those lines. I've changed these. Rather than me having to type anything, I've actually hard-coded the username and password in for these devices. And line 10 is this, if you remember, creates a telnet session. So this is going to create the telnet session. This is then logging in, which is absolutely fantastic. And then what I'm doing is, rather than an LS, I'm going to do a show version. So the show version here is what I'm going to do. Now, the important thing to realize when you're programming is if you put garbage in, if you put garbage in, you will get garbage out. So this is a key concept in programming. It's often called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So you need to make sure that whatever you're doing with Telnet, you actually automate exactly right. Now, what you'll find is if you just do a show ver on a Cisco, it will stop after a page and say more. Now, the problem is, if you do that, then you'd have to write your Telnet program to hit return to move on to the next page, etc. So what we've actually done here is we've done a terminal length 0, which is quite awful that we have to do that, but that's what you have to do with Telnet. You have to put each individual step. So here's my code, exactly the same as the code before, but I'm going to connect to 10.99.11, which is a router here. It's router 1. So I'm just going to connect to that router from my network automation server, yeah, which is where this code is. And I'll just click up here to run it. And down here, you'll see it's running. and back comes the answer already. And this is shows me the version information. So it's a Cisco 2206 or something is what it's showing me on this particular thing. So what I've written here is a nice simple program. Yeah, I view it as simple. You may not do, but you could copy and paste this program. And rather than do show ver, you could do all sorts of things. Now, the one thing is, again, with a Cisco, you need to know if I was doing something else, such as I might want to do, well, no, in this particular case, it's just doing a show run as well. No, I don't. Yes, sometimes you need to go into enable mode. If you remember, I did tell you anything with a hash is a comment. The reason I've done this is I've made sure that when we telnet in, we're automatically in privilege mode. Otherwise, what this would have done was to go into enable mode for us. But I've cheated. I've just simplified the code by taking that out. So whereas this code did a show ver, this code will actually do a show run. But there's a subtle difference here. This is how easy it is to do automation. It's very similar. Lines 1 and 2, line 1 isn't needed on this. What I've got here is import the telnet library. What I'm going to do is connect to 10. That doesn't seem, actually, that line's not needed at all. That line is absolutely not needed. So forget about that. I've just set my username and my password. And then what I say is for numbers 11, 12, and 13. I could have gone all sorts, any number. I could have read these from a file, but here's a nice simple example. Whereas this one just got a version from one machine, what this piece of code will do is actually loop round and do it. We'll connect to 11, and then I'll connect to 12 and 13. So if you remember, I've just got the 3 routers that I'm particularly interested in. Could be 100, but 3 is a nice number just to test things out. So my code will, in this particular case, rather than just work once, so I'm going to run the code now, it will loop round and do lots of show runs. So that's router 1's, that's router 2's running config, and this is router 3's config. So you can see that I've actually got the configs here. Yeah, okay, I'm just scrolling up. There's the IP address for this particular device. There's the username, SNT user, I love networks 99. Privilege level 15, which is what I was saying. Now, if this was Juniper, it would work exactly the same as long as Telnet is supported. And somewhere it will, yeah, okay, it will have the host name. I can't see the host name, but here is the router 2's config, etc. So this is an example of looping round and round for lots of different devices. Any questions? I'm guessing not. Okay, let's keep going. So Telnet, why do we pick that one? It can be useful. So don't, not everyone bans it. A lot of people do, I agree. But Telnet lib is actually an inbuilt Python library. You don't need to do a pip install to use it. And this is just a nice, simple example that we often use. So this one is for Unix, but I've shown you an example working with Cisco. You can do anything, and this is the base configuration. Yep. Okay. If, and as a lot of people want to do, is use SSH, that's absolutely fine. So there are lots of Python libraries for SSH. PyPy is the place to go. So you can always go to PyPy. So PyPy is a website. So if I just go to here, and if I search for PyPy, actually, it's already taken me to where I was searching for something for Excel. Let's just go back to the actual PyPy website. What you'll find is what I said was, if you're going to, oh yeah, sorry.
Just because you wanted the questions, but we've got another question about, could you explain the print command, please?
The print command, was that on a particular line, or was it this print command?
I'm guessing so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Perhaps this is the best one. So the print command, okay, it's actually a print function. So here is another Python program. It's a very simple one. So it's all pre-prepared. I could type them out, but it's a lot easier to have pre-prepared. So what does print do? It's very, very simple. Whatever is put in these round brackets is what will be printed. So if I run this particular one, Yeah, okay. Can you see down here, all it's done is put out hello world. Yeah, okay. So I could actually put absolutely anything in there. I'll run the program again, and this time, rather than just hello world, it then puts links, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so what does print do? It actually, whatever it's given, it will print out on the screen. Yep, okay. I'm using Python 3 here. This is what you should be using. So print should be used with the round brackets, which is the Python 3 way of doing things. So if you were looking at this one, the print command, what we're actually doing here, I'll try and do it on the slide. If I get back to the slide that was we were doing, this will, rather than print hello world or whatever, what this is actually doing is TN, this is my telnet session, so I'm reading everything from the telnet. So I'm reading everything from telnet and I'm going to print it out on the screen. So again, if I just go back to my code, and I pick this show this show run and run it. Yeah, the prints are showing everything. Yeah, okay, including my exit commands. Yeah, so it's not just giving me the config here. The print is giving me everything from the telnet, which is including the actual show run. But if you look here, it's actually got terminal length 0, show run. It's got exactly what's coming from the telnet session, which is what tn.readAll has actually done. Hopefully that's okay, Lindsay. If it's not, get them to shout again, and that's fine.
Yep. Yeah, we'll pick it up at the end if not. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, no worries. I think I was doing a slide. Yeah. Sorry, I just need to. Sorry, I just need to get back to my machine, and I can't. Sorry about this. If you talk amongst yourselves, I will get rid of this somewhere. I'm just going to stop sharing. It's going to be the easiest way, just to get the screen back. Sorry about this. Make that an icon, and then I'm going to share the screen again. Sorry about this. I couldn't get back to my own machine. I was remote desktoped in, and it wouldn't disappear enough for me to jump back. But anyway, back to the slide. So the print function just prints out whatever you tell it to print. Yep. Okay, that's right. And then I was talking about libraries. So the idea is, if you want to know what libraries you can actually use, if you go to PyPy, this is where you can search things. So if I search for SSH, you'll find here's a list of SSH libraries. You'll have your own security policies, so don't just go, if you're security conscious, work for a bank or anything important, don't just go using any libraries. You need to do your own security vetting, what libraries are safe, etc. Just because they're on PyPy doesn't mean they're safe. But two common ones for SSH in network automation is Paramiko and Netmiko. Paramiko is lower level. Netmico uses Paramiko and makes it simpler, and therefore for network automation we would normally use Netmico. Paramiko can be used. I've seen it used, let's say, for Junipers, because this comes into the LINX underneath the CLI, which can be useful sometimes. So what does Python have? It's libraries, and there's libraries for SSH. And Netmico and Paramiko will use SSH to connect to network devices. And here's some actual Netmico code. So again, here's a keyword, import. So this imports the library. In this case, we're not importing the whole library, but here's Netmico. So this code is using Netmico to do an SSH. This is actually a Python dictionary. Don't worry too much about that. But what's going to be, if I was teaching Python and I had loads of time, we'd talk about dictionaries in detail. But basically what I'm doing here is setting up all the parameters to actually connect. So what I'm going to be doing is connecting to this IP address with this username, with this password. Yeah, and all of those are going to be passed into the connect handler. Where does the connect handler come from? So it can get complex, but on the other hand, don't get bogged down. too badly. Here's the connect handler. That connect handler is this connect handler here, which is coming from Netmico. So what does this line actually do? What that line actually does is this forms the SSH connection for you. What's brilliant about this is not only does it do the SYN-ACK, blah, 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 it sorts out certificates or passwords, whatever's being used. From now on, whereas before it was always TN, this is not my code, I'll always use shorter names than this. I've now got something called NetConnect, which is my SSH connection. And what am I going to do in this example? I'm going to use NetConnect. So NetConnect is my SSH connection. So here's NetConnect, and it's there as well. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to use NetConnect send command, and I'm going to use NetConnect and send a config set. Yeah, okay. In this particular simple case, all this code will actually do is run show IP int brief on this one particular machine. And then it's going to do some config commands. I'm going to configure a loopback address, and this is using it for configuration. What's going to be printed? It's going to print the output from these commands. And that's a nice, simple Netmico script. Let's just have a look. So I've got some real code here. So looking at Netmico, here's the same code. For, line 1 is importing from Netmico. That's the library. And here's the dictionary. It's run a bit written more nicely because it doesn't have to fit on a slide here. And it's got the right username password for the devices that I've got. But it's the same thing, but I'm just going to run show IP in brief. Yeah, and if I look here, this is now doing an SSH connection, and this is show IP interface brief on that first router. So from my network automation machine, I've connected to this router here, 1099.11, and I've done a show IP int brief on it. The beauty of this is, though, let me just check. No, this example doesn't do it either. All I would need to do is shift all this code like I did here into a for loop. I could have done for host in blah, 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 blah. And this Netmico script could have gone around all my devices. So what we're really saying is, if you combine this code, but if you take out all this blah, 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 which is the telnet code, and just put in these simple 3 lines. Yeah, okay, just put in this simple code in the for loop, and lo and behold, what you'll find is you can loop round, and you might have 100 devices, and I can find out the IP interface status on each of them. Now, I like that because what I find is that a lot of sites, although you've got SNMP to find these sort of details, what you'll find is by doing the Python code, you can do it yourself, you can automate it and pull it in together for your own use, which is really neat. Because often you won't have access to SolarWinds or whatever network management platform you're using. So all you do is send the commands that you actually want. In this particular case as well, I'm actually configuring loopbacks on one machine. You can actually automate all this and do it on all your devices, however you want to do it. Yep, okay. And that's how SSH works. But note, what I need to know is that I am connecting to a Cisco device. You have to tell Netmico that as well. So it's quite interesting. This bit here is saying I'm connecting to a normal Cisco iOS, whereas in the slide earlier, we were using something else. Yep, okay. Now, the point is, because I'm using a Cisco iOS, I need to know that's the syntax of the command. I've got to get that exact syntax across. This is actually poor programming. It should be show IP interfaces brief just to make sure it really works. Yep. Okay, I'm just having a problem going back to my own machine each time. So I'm just going to have to stop screen sharing again. Sorry about this. Now I'm back to my machine. Now just share the screen. Sorry about this. I'll try and get that sorted out in the coffee break. So Netmico, very, very simple. you could copy this code, put it in a for loop, the for loop I showed you, and you could loop round. Just make sure you change the IP address each time, and away you go. This shows both getting information and actually configuration. Don't forget, be careful if you were doing this on live machines and you were doing it on 1,000 machines, you will end up with 1,000 machines all having this IP address if you just put that code in. Just make sure you test things. Yep. Right, what we can do is we can use SSH, we can use Telnet, and both of those are using the CLI, which is absolutely fine. But the problem is when you actually get anything back from Chauffeur and it comes back in, it comes as text. And the problem is, if you want to change that, if you were doing a show run, the config will come back as text, then it's very hard to manipulate. You would have to use what are called regular expressions. And although I like regular expressions and other people do, they're tricky and you can make mistakes easily. So we try to avoid regular expressions. What we want is we want lists and dictionaries. So rather than using Telnet and SSH, what we can actually do is there's a lovely library that will get it into dictionaries for us, yeah, which is the text FSM library. Yeah, okay, that's well worth looking at in your own time, I'd say. But what we're going to move on to now, we've got about 6 minutes roughly until coffee break. I'm going to have a look at Netconf, and I think Netconf will, and I'll have a look at RESTCONF and just look at the code for Netconf and RESTCONF. So let's have a look at what they are. So Netconf. Netconf is a protocol. So it is a protocol. It's quite an old protocol. And in that protocol, it has, rather than, let's say, an SNMP get or get next, etc., Netconf is actually, some people call it SNMP version 4. Yeah, because SNMP itself is not good for configuration. It's no good. Don't use to configure devices. Yeah, it's not designed for that. It doesn't work very well. Instead of coming up with SNMP version 4, they came out with Netconf, and it's designed to work with configurations. And it's got get config, edit config. We can delete configs. We can lock the configs, all sorts of good things. You can't see this in Wireshark that easily because it is secure. It runs on top of SSH. And the library that implements it for us is ncclient. So if you want to use Netconf and within your Python program, we can use ncclient, and that will do all the TCP, SYN, SYNAC, etc. And it will do the edit configs, etc. It works on port 830. It does need to be enabled on whatever devices that you're going to be working with. Yeah, and that is what Netconf does. Here is an example ncclient script. Here we say use the library. So the common thing is you pick which library you're going to want to use. So we're importing from ncclient. And then what we're doing here is we're going to create a connection. So again, what we're getting from the library is a Netconf connection. We're importing this thing called manager, which is the manager here. And what I'm going to do is connect using that manager. Now, in this particular case, I don't know exactly which machine we're connecting to, but from now on, my connection will be called M. This is my connection. And in this simple case, my connection that's called M is actually called m.getConfig. So m.getConfig. So this will just get the running config from M. M will be whatever device I connected to there. And then what we're going to actually do, this is pretty neat. These two lines will write it to a file. So what we do is we get the config. And in this code, we store in a file. Don't forget, we could always have a loop here. So we could always have for router in. And then we could put each of the devices that we actually want. And then just get the syntax right. We could loop round, 100 devices, no problems at all, and get all their configs. Yep. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just quickly show you some code, and then I think we'll take a coffee break. So let's just have a look at some code here. And the code I'm going to show you is not my own code, because why would I write my own code, given that I'm lazy? Here's some code. It actually, just to give them credit, comes from Cisco. All these lines are comments. Yeah, okay, so I'm allowed to use it. I'll just let everyone know it's from Cisco, and from ncclient, import manager. So I'm going to import something called manager from ncclient, i.e. this is going to do some Netconf. Now, what we'll then see, you can see I'm also importing some XML libraries, and the reason being is when you use Netconf, your configuration will be in, here's an example. This is my configuration, and it will be in XML format. Here we're connecting to an actual device, and it will be known as N. And what I'm doing here is I'm getting the config, yeah, but rather than the whole config, I'm using a filter to only get certain things. So all I'm doing is getting certain part of the config. Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to print out, well, let's just run it. I think this will give me an error. Let's just quickly try it. No, it worked. Sorry about that. So what we're doing here, if you look, it's connected to a device. It's got me the config. And look at this. This is XML format. So here it's telling me I've got a loopback 100, but it's in XML format that I'm getting everything. But the device I'm actually connecting to here is actually a Cisco DevNet device. It's an always-on lab. So it's to this machine is out there on the internet. I'm connecting to that machine with the appropriate credentials. Yeah, okay. And what I've actually got is a list of the different interfaces there. Yeah, okay, whether they're enabled. I've got the actual config, so I know which IP addresses, etc. Here's another bit of code, add loopback. And what this will do is this is the code to actually configure a device using Netconf. If I just quickly run that bit of code, and then we will take coffee break. I've got about 10 seconds to do this. So let's have loopback 444. What description will I have? I'll have LINX. Let's just say as a description. What IP address? 1.1.1.1. Obviously, this isn't going to be used at all. And there, what I've just done is configured 1.1.1. Oh, it hasn't actually worked for some reason. Yeah, okay, I tried to configure this device. I think I know why it may not have worked, but it didn't work. So I'm just going to try that one more time. Loopback to add 44, description to use LINX, IP address 1.1.1. This is all coming from the Python program, which mask. And hopefully that's not working either. What I suggest is, one of the things I've got to say is because these labs are always on, some people do actually mess with them and stop things working. But it is working. So I am getting a connection with the get interface list. I'm going to do some debugging on the add loopback and find out what's actually going wrong on that one. It did work this morning before we started. What I suggest we do is take a 10-minute coffee break, Lindsay, or should we call it 8 minutes?
Refers back to the Jeremiah's asked a question about the file was Netmiko. It's the line 10, and he's just asking what are the asterisks for before the IOSV_12.
Very good question. So let's just check here. So the question is, just for everyone else, if you look here, I've got this iOS blah 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 blah. Now, what is it to do with? So what I've got here is a variable called IOSV_L2_S1, and here is the variable as well. So what type in Python? All variables have a data type. This is not a string, and this is not an integer, because it's got the curly brackets here and here. This variable is a dictionary. What the star does is turn a dictionary into a set of named variables to pass into the function. This may go whoosh over some people's heads, but hopefully for whoever asked the question, what's actually going to be passed into the connect handler is it will say device type equals Cisco iOS, IP equals 10.99.99.11. I could have written that out there, but the idea is I've shifted the code into a dictionary, which is the preferred way to do it. So to summarize, what the asterisk is doing is turning a dictionary into a set of named variables that are going to be passed into connect handler. Who determines the names? It's the people that wrote the Netmiko library. Hopefully that's okay as an answer.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. And if we slide into a break now and come back at 11, shall we say?
Okay, yeah, I'm more than happy just for a quick 6-minute break. People
Yeah,
can run and get their coffees and we'll start again at 11.
Steve, are we ready to go for the second part? You're on mute at the moment, but I'll just read one question out. We had a question come in just before the break. It was, will you show how to use input from a file or for input like using the FOR loop or for loop?
I wasn't going to, but I can quickly. So shall I share my screen and start with that question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Right. Okay. So the question was, do we know how to open a file for reading? And the answer is, as with everything, rather than you writing your own code to do it, you'll find that there are libraries that you can always use. Now, actually, file handling is such a common thing to actually have that what you'll find is the file handling is built into Python. You don't need to import any library. And it's as simple as these two lines here. In this particular case. So what I'm doing here is opening a file called demofile.txt. Yeah, okay. So I'm opening it in read-only mode. Yeah, and this is how, what this will do is read the file and just print it out to a screen. So that's a very simple example. You could run the example, whatever's in the file. So here's the code, and that's what would actually happen if you ran it. Yep. So the answer to the question is, not as such, but you would just do open, and then you can choose which file to read. We do cover it in our courses. I'm just looking for a better example. This is just reading one line at a time, but no. So all you would do is just open the file for reading. So it's these two lines is the actual answer, and then using variations of those. What you could do is rather than print, you could say, you could loop round the file as per this example. So if so in this example, you could use this example, and if your file, rather than having a demo file, has got an IP address in it, you could say f equals open blah blah blah. So f is now my file, and then for x in f, rather than print x, we could say IP equals x. So what we'll then do, well, x is actually our IP address, so we could telnet to X or whatever we actually want to do. So rather than, whereas I gave the example of the for loop looping around with IP addresses that are built into the code, you could use this bit of code and use X there for X in F, assuming this is all IP addresses. So for X in F would replace the code that I actually had. If I go back up to here, show run. So rather than for hosting, it will be for hosting the file name as per the other code. So that's the quick answer. Hopefully that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, assuming there's not any others, what I was doing was I was trying to show you, I showed you a bit of Netconf, yeah, okay, and then I was trying to add the loop back. Now I've added that. I think the reason it wasn't working is I may have been given a duplicate IP address. So if you look here, I've added a description here, loopback 57, yeah, okay, with a description of LINX. So I've just run this add loopback, and I've given 9876, yeah, okay. So you can actually add loopbacks. What's this code actually doing? If I go right up to the top, it's importing the library. So we import the library, and then somewhere along the line, I'll be using ncclient. with Manager Connect, blah, blah, blah. So this is the connection. The connection will be known as M. And then what it will actually do is, rather than a get config, I'm doing an edit config. Yeah, I'm not editing everything. I'm editing just the data that I form. So this code actually takes what I type in to form the XML code. And that's what's actually happening there. Yeah, okay, that's loopback 57. So if I run get interface list, again, this is just my Python code, get interface list. I think it says there's a 57. Loopback 57 is enabled. Sorry about this. So it is enabled. So what I can do is delete loopback 57. Which loopback do I want to delete? This is coming from the Python code. This is the XML to delete line 57, and it's deleted it. How can I prove it's deleted it? It could be all smoke and mirrors, but I'm just running different Python programs to do different things. So I have to keep going up and down. There's a good reason for that. Yeah, that will probably still work. Yeah, okay. And 57 is now missing. Yep, okay. And that was Netconf. Right. We don't need that anymore. I jumped some slides. So very basically, what we were looking at was Netconf. What Netconf does is it's a protocol for editing configurations. Now, the beauty of this is you could do this with SSH, but then you get all sorts of problems with SSH where which config do we edit, etc. Whereas Netconf can sort all that out. It just makes it a whole lot easier. So Netconf is a nice way to do it. Although what you need to realize is Netconf uses XML. So XML is what your configs will be in XML doing it this way. Now, the beauty is over here, my Python will have a dictionary. So we take the dictionary. Yeah, well, actually, we may actually read it from a file even. Pump it in, we can work on that file, do whatever we want as a dictionary, then we convert it back to XML and pump it across, and we can configure devices that way. And that's what Netconf is about. Some people don't like Netconf, which is fine. If you don't like Netconf, what you can use, ncclient is the library that uses Netconf. If you don't like that, what you can do is use something called RESTCONF.
Before we go too far, Steve, we've got a quick question saying, is there a Netconf for Linux?
Not that I'm aware. So, there's two parts to Netconf. There's the client and there's the server. So just to clarify my answer, as far as I'm aware, I think the question is saying, is there Netconf for a Netconf server for Linux? I'm going to say no, but it wouldn't surprise me if you may find one. So Netconf is designed for network devices. However, given that some network devices run on Linux anyway, I'm sure that there is code out there that runs on Linux, but what I wouldn't be doing is using Netconf to change configuration of Linux devices. What I'd be doing there, and again, although I was it was a Unix admin in those days, I haven't been a Unix admin for ages. I'd be looking at tools like Ansible that would do it all for me, but you could do it with Python, but then I'll probably be dropping to SSH, to be honest. Is that okay as a quick answer? So I think not, but I'd have to Google it. Yep.
No problem. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Right. Programmers for years have been, before network automation became the flavor of the decade or whatever, programmers have been using REST APIs. What is a REST API? It's where we use HTTP or HTTPS. That's what it's saying here. So the example here is using port HTTP with port 80. It's no problem using HTTPS. And for years, HTTP has been around since early 90s. It allows me to get and put things. Get allows me to get configs. And put allows me to configure the device. So we can do that with REST APIs. That's been around for ages. In terms of libraries, there's a request library. which is in Python. And that request library allows me to use a REST API. There is a particular version which is called RESTCONF. Now, what you need to know is when you do a GET, often you put something like http://www.snt.co.uk whatever it is that you want to access on that website. What we're going to end up with is URLs. So we need to have URLs /R1, I'll keep it short, and then it can be whatever URL. Now, when you do, what you'll find is the URLs are actually specified by Yang. So what is RESTCONF? RESTCONF is using the REST API, but you're using Yang to specify what URLs are allowed to be used and which URLs we use to get the interfaces, etc. Yeah, which is pretty neat, really. So Yang is a modeling language. So Yang isn't passing along the line as such. It's just telling us which URLs we can use. What Yang does with Netconf, Yang tells us what tags. So Yang specifies what tags that we can use in our XML. Whereas with RESTCONF, it's telling us what URLs we can use, and that's what RESTCONF is. Yep. Okay, so if I'm looking at some code, here's some RESTCONF code. And again, this code is available on Cisco DevNet, if I can find it. Here's RESTCONF, and here's a piece of code. So this is using RESTCONF. Whoops. Yeah, so this is the RESTCONF. So if I look at this code, there's import requests. Yeah, okay. Why is it importing requests? That's the library. And hovering over it, this is something VS Code does. So it shows me it's the request HTTP library. So if I scroll down, what we'll find is what this is doing is creating a URL. So this is my URL I'm creating. And here I do request.get. So this is going to do a get. So if I run this code, yeah, this is going out, and this has got the data, and there is no data to get because there is no loopback 101 found, is what you can see at the bottom. So loopback 101 doesn't exist. What this will do, I'm pretty sure, is create loopback 101. Yeah, okay. Let's just see. Let's just run this code. I'm pretty sure that's what that code does. I think that's run it and created a loopback 101. And to find out, I can run this code again, which is my get interfaces. So this is all using HTTP to interface with a particular Cisco device. This time, rather than saying loopback 101 hasn't been found, it's come back and I've configured it with this IP address, this mask, etc. Now, interestingly, if you note this, some of you may know, some of you may not know, this is not XML format, but this is actually JSON format. So most people using the request library and RESTCONF will use JSON for their configurations as opposed to XML. Yep, okay. And somewhere the IP address is being configured. Here it says about loopback 101. I'm just trying to find okay, it's actually it's in another file where it sets the IP address, but that's fine. It is doing all that. That's what that code's doing. That is what RESTCONF actually does. Quite straightforward. Right. So what we're saying is, if we use the CLI, what we can do is we can use, typically we would use Netmico. And with Netmico, what we can do is actually, we can configure the devices, but to change the configurations, we have to use regular expressions. And these are really, really messy. Yeah, okay. There are ways to maybe get them into dictionaries, but we don't like this. What is useful though, is if we want to do show rather than configure, then what we can use is text FSM if you want to get it into a dictionary. Yeah, which is pretty neat. But the CLI, it is step 0, but where we want to get to is to Nirvana, which is using Netconf for RESTCONF. They're more or less the same. I'm a network person, so I prefer Netconf, a lot of people prefer RESTCONF because it does support XML and JSON. Yeah, formats. A lot of people prefer JSON as to see their configurations, where XML looks a bit messier. If I just show you some XML, I'm sure I've got some XML configs here. Here is, here's an XML example. What I've got here is some XML, and this is actually XML for a gigabit Ethernet 2. There's the description. It's enabled, blah, blah, blah. And this is just an example of some XML. Whereas if I look at it in JSON, yeah, this is what it looks like. Now, they probably look messy either way to you, but don't forget they're not designed for humans. They're actually designed for programs, yeah, in particular Python programs. And that's what we actually want to get to using those devices. Now, interestingly, there is also YAML, yeah, okay. Now, YAML is an interesting one. So YAML, let me just check something. Yeah, so YAML is not often used for configurations as such, but it is. So I would say it's used for variables to put in configurations. Yeah, okay, that's where YAML is often used. So the Nirvana, some people, rather than using Netconf and RESTCONF, what they're actually doing is they're actually taking YAML, okay, and what they do is actually use the command line interface, yeah, okay, and use the YAML to produce. So assuming it's Cisco, what we're actually going to do is we could use Netmiko, yeah, okay, and we can actually send the config. Now it will be in Cisco iOS format, but what we can do is, or Juniper format, whichever format you actually want. But what we can do is actually have all the configuration in YAML that's then put into the Cisco iOS format for us, which gets rid of the irregular expressions, but allows us to configure devices that way. Yep. To give you an example, what you'd use here is the Ginger 2 library. And the code to actually do this, if you look here, import Ginger 2, you should be thinking, oh, okay, that's a library. Oh, here's a YAML library. Yep. Any questions while I'm just digging out something for myself here?
No, we're all good at the moment. No,
I was just bluffing for time anyway, sorry. Right, okay, so what we've got here is a Ginger 2 example. And what I'm saying is here, this is my iOS format. Didn't have to be iOS format, but here is a config file, hostname R1. If you're used to Cisco, this is actually 2 loopbacks that have been configured. Yeah, okay, this is a plain text configuration file, but where's it come from? Here is my YAML data. And what I've got here is this is what YAML looks like. But what I'm doing here for router 1, for router 2, for router 3, I've got, this is my configuration. So what we're doing with YAML, interestingly, is I can actually have all my variables in one file. And what I can do is use Ginger 2. So I can use Ginger 2, and this is actually just line 25 of the code here. So if I look at this one line, just this one line of code here is actually taking all these variables. Now, actually, someone wanted an example of reading from a file. This is a for loop here. I forgot I've got this example, and we're saying for each host in my config data. This is an example with a YAML file. So for each host, for router 1, router 2, router 3, what with line 25 will get run for R1, R2, and R3. And what it will do, what Ginger 2 will do, we will, when we render, so the keyword is render, here's the code I'm rendering, it will take the template, and here's my template. So I need a .j2 template. Yeah, okay. And all these, all these bits that the guy's done in pink here for me are actually variables that are coming from the YAML file. And then in this particular case, I'm doing an f.write. So I'm writing them to a file. Yeah, so if you look, I'm writing it to a file. The extra code on the end would be to use Netmiko to push the configs out. This is pretty wicked stuff, I think. Anyway, so what we're doing here is effectively lines 7 and 10. So line 7 and line 10 finds the template. That's all those lines are doing. Yeah, that's this template here. That's lines 7 and 10. Yeah, okay. What I then do is this line here, 13 and 14, are getting the YAML file. Yeah, get the YAML, and it puts it in a dictionary as well. Yeah, and then line 25, 25 even, is the key thing that is actually going around taking the YAML variables, pumping them in there, and then I am writing it to a file. Those files could be then pushed out to the devices, you know, however many I've got. And as I add routers, as I change different things, this becomes my source of truth, as they say. Now, do I expect you to understand all this if this is all new? No, but I would thoroughly recommend looking at Ginger 2 and perhaps this sample code, which is very simple with these. It will produce these configs for us. Yep. Okay. Right, that's Ginger 2. So we're covering lots of different libraries. I'm giving you a tour. That's what I did say, a 2-hour tour of different things. And there is yet another library. So what we've been doing is we're looking at lots of different libraries. And the reason we like libraries is that does all the hard work for us. So rather than us writing our own code, we're using other people's code. And we didn't see these examples because we're looking at network automation. I showed you a Telnet example, and I didn't show you this one, but I did show you Netmiko, which uses Paramiko. We had a look at ncclient, we had a look at requests, and now we're moving on to the higher level libraries. And napalm is a higher level library that is multi-vendor. Anything that's multi-vendor, I do like. So let's have a look at what napalm is. So napalm has two things. So what is it? It's a Python library. So it shouldn't surprise you when we're, don't forget, I haven't been covering this. You would need to do a pip install of napalm before using it. And in fact, actually on Windows, make sure you do py-m pip install. Otherwise, you end up with issues, but that's just for clarification. So pip install of napalm, and then you'll have to do an import napalm. And that's always the 2 steps. So the 2 steps to using libraries: step 1, do a pip install of whatever library, and step 2 is we import it. Now, once you've imported napalm, you get 2 different things. You get what are called getters. Yeah, this is looking. And I did say that's not really network automation, which is why we're not concentrating on it too much, but it is pretty neat. The reason it's pretty neat is it will work on Cisco or Juniper or Arista or many others. And the getters, you'll find that there's different getters. So I can get a routing table, I can get the ARP table, I could get the MAC address table. Now we could do that with SSH before, but if I wanted the IP addresses for the interfaces, so these will be standard function names here. Whereas before, we had to do things like show IP int brief was in one of the commands that I did. Rather than that, napalm gets me code that will work on the different devices. Yeah, it knows which command to run underneath. Is it? Yeah, so it's one thing napalm gives you is looking. So again, when you start out your network automation journey, look. But then the other part is actually configuration. And this is where napalm really gets neat. So I can do configuration with SSH or with Netconf, but I can use napalm. Now, when I use napalm, For example, when I use napalm with Junos, what it will actually do is use, this is PyEasy, as I called it earlier. So what you'll find is napalm does support Juniper, which is no big surprise, and it will use this library. Whereas if I use bog standard iOS, it will use Netmiko, it will use SSH. Yeah, Netmico actually supports Telnet as well, which is quite interesting. If you've got Fortinets, they're supported as well, and it will use this particular library. So what napalm does is it will use the appropriate libraries underneath for you, depending which device I connect to, which is pretty neat. This is not all the devices. This is just a subset. So Mixtix is quite interesting that they are supported. The real benefit of napalm is not the getters, it's to do with the configuration. And what's really neat is it allows me to replace configs. It allows me to merge configs. So rather than me worrying about with SSH whether I'm replacing the whole config or merging it, it's a lot clearer in napalm. If you are going to do this, this is a lot trickier, I've found in experience. The reason being is often you'll find there's in banners, if it uses Control-C, they can be misread, etc. But it does work. Yeah, I can replace configs, merge configs. I can compare configs, so I can see the difference between candidates, and I can have candidates. So the beauty is what I can start having is candidate configs as well as running configs. So if we've been using Netmico, you'd be editing the running config directly. A lot of you that are Juniper guys, you're used to this idea of working on a candidate config. What's beauty about napalm is for the iOS, it is fully supported, all yes. So with bog standard Cisco devices, I can actually work on a candidate config and do whatever I want on a candidate config and configure my device. It is not live until I tell it to go live. This is really interesting. What's more, when I tell it to go live, I can actually roll back if I've messed up. This is really neat. So the idea is I can have my candidate. When I go live, I can then make sure it's my running config, which is fantastic. But then what I can do is, if I then decide it's no good, I can then use rollback. So napalm comes back with a rollback method that allows me to roll back to my old config, whatever my old config was. So you can have your old config as well, and I can roll back. So the rollback would go back that way. Copy this in. This is what the rollback does. Now, there's always the issue, and this is always the funny thing, is the sort of mistake that's made when people start making configuration changes. If you start changing IP addresses, you may get it wrong and you may actually lose connectivity. What you can actually do is when you commit, so there is a commit function, yeah, and when you commit with napalm, you can revert back in 60 seconds. I forgot the exact syntax, but it does allow me to commit, and if I don't give it the actual okay, yeah, okay, then it will roll back. Yeah, okay, this is pretty neat stuff, what's actually going on there. Yeah, okay. So all in all, yeah, so it's confirm commit. So the idea is what I can then do is I can check and then I can confirm the commit. Once I'm happy that it's all good. Yeah, always make sure you test things. This is 60 seconds, which is a bit aggressive, but if you're trying it out, that's useful. And it all works on iOS. It works on Junos as well, but Junos people have had that for ages. Yep. Okay, here's a first napalm script. How do I know it's napalm? Here's my libraries. Here's my imports. And I'm importing from napalm. Yeah, I'm also importing JSON in this example. I'm using iOS in this particular case, and I'm connecting to this machine. Now, the question is, what connections to this, well, it's this line here, does the connection. But the question is, what is it using? Now, you can't answer me there, but which connection is it using? Is it using Netconf, as an example, or is it using SSH? And in this example, it's using SSH in this example because it's iOS. So the iOS, if you remember, is what's used. Yeah, okay. Underneath, here's the library, Netmiko, SSH, if it's iOS. If it was Junos, so if it was Junos, it would have used PyEasy, and PyEasy actually uses, so if this was Junos, then it would have used Netconf, and that's what's actually going on there. So the beauty of napalm, is that what it actually does is it uses the appropriate connection method for the devices that you're actually working with, rather than you having to work it out. And in this particular case, what am I doing? I'm just getting, this is a getter, which is getting facts. Yeah, that's what that getter is actually doing. Here's some example code of napalm. Yeah, so here's some napalm. This is get facts. That's the same code. Let's look at this code. Don't forget lines with hashes of comments. So I'm connecting to 10.99.99.11. I could get the MAC address table, except I couldn't. This is not a router. So I'm going to get the config here. Yeah, okay. Again, I could put it all in a for loop. I could be reading that from a file. And if I scroll down, what I should be getting is the config from that device. And look, there's the config. Yeah, which was got from the one device. I could have put it in a for loop to get lots and lots. So it's got a loop back, blah, 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 blah. It's got the username. It's got a host name there somewhere. There, host name R1. And this is what I've got. Note, it's much neater than before. I haven't got all that extra rubbish. It only got me back the config. And I can use any number of different gets. All these lines are comments with different ways of displaying the output. So the output here is displayed in text format, but I could have got it back in JSON format, which is what these lines are to do with if I wanted to work on a config and then put it back. Yep. In this example, what this code would have done, this is quite neat. This would actually do a remote ping. So from 11, this will ping 12. And again, it's just an example of the sort of things that you can actually do. But the interesting thing is the actual configs, which isn't an example I've actually got. This is get facts can be done either in JSON. So this is JSON, which is meant to be quite readable. This is a Python dictionary. So the beauty of napalm is if you want, you can have the output nicely, or if you just print the facts, you can do that. But facts is a dictionary. And if it's in a dictionary, Python likes it. That's a key that I want you to take away, that dictionaries are very, very useful on all this. Okay, this slide I don't think we really need. I'll put it in just just in case. What it's talking about, it's just an example that I've done before, but to sum it up, let's just pick a different color. So what we're talking, that color doesn't show. That's a black. Right, what this is saying is what we can do is take text configs, use SSH, the Netmiko library, or telnetlib, and configure devices that way. Yeah, text FSM can get it back into dictionaries, and that's something that we were talking about. Text FSM won't, it only works on some show commands, not on all. And what I'd say is, if you come away from here and your first ever goes, I would look at using Netmiko to show this, show that, etc. But then we were looking at the fact that we can actually have our configs in XML and use ncclient to configure devices. Yeah, but rather than that, I don't forget, I did also talk about Ginger 2 and where I can use Netmiko and configure devices, but I'm using a YAML file. The variables go into a dictionary that then go into the template that produce the text file, the iOS text file, and I can use configuration that way, which is starting to structure the data. But what we've just looked at is napalm, and napalm can either use SSH or Netconf or RESTCONF, depending what device. So it can use RESTCONF as well, depending what device it's going to. yeah, to configure these actual devices. And that's what's being talked about there. Something we've not talked about, again, 2 hours is very, very short. Here's some code. Let's just change my pen back. So you should be getting used. Here we import, and what are we doing? We're importing libraries. These libraries are other people's code that we're going to be using, and in particular, importing napalm. Now, this does the actual connection. Is it using SSH or is it using Netconf? You don't know until you look up here. This tells me, it implies that what we're going to use is Netmico. And if I'm using Netmico, this implies that this will use SSH to connect to this device. Again, to simplify the code, this is only going to connect to one device, put it in a for loop. Yeah, okay, and then you can loop round and connect to lots of devices, 100, however many devices you've actually got. But what is all this about? Something you should do, if you remember, what I said is you can work on a candidate. I was talking about working on a candidate before you actually commit. So the idea is what you can actually do is you could change the config. This isn't doing all this, but what we could do is change the config. On the device, but then we can test it. And the idea is we test it. Once we're happy with the testing, then we can commit, is the idea. And if we're not happy, or we can roll back. Yeah, and get rid of our commit. Now, what is testing? Now, you can do different things for testing, but what napalm gives us is this excellent thing called a compliance report. And what I can do is create a YAML file, which is a list of things that I want to check. Yeah, okay, to check that everything's okay. So the idea is this code, all this is doing is running a compliance report on one particular router. Yeah, what is it checking? It depends what's in this file. And then it's outputting the output. Rather than outputting, which is what's going on here. So this is just outputting. Yeah. What I'm saying is, rather than output, what we can do is, before this, we can change the config. The test is actually this bit, and then rather than doing the print, yeah, okay, that's where we could commit a rollback. But this validation is a really excellent part of napalm. So the idea is we can do ping checks, check the interfaces are up, all sorts of checks that we want to check that the router is how we actually thought it was. Right. Now, the pièce de résistance, my favorite library. Napalm is pretty good. Yeah, okay, so don't get me wrong. Napalm I do like, but I even like this one even better. So what is Nornir? It's a Python library. So what you should be fully expecting, you need to do a pip install. And to do the pip install, you actually find there's actually multiple ones for Nornir at the moment, but you can always read the documentation. Once we've done the pip install, I will import it. What is the real beauty of it all? Well, it does two things for you. So there was a question earlier, which was pretty neat, which was, can I have an example? Roughly, the question was, can I have an example of reading from a file for the loop to go around all the routers? So we had code roughly like this, 4 routers in, and we had IP addresses, but it's fine. So for router 10, for router 11, for router 12, in this case, printing, but we could have been doing Netmico, or it could have been Netconf, it could have been any of these. What you'll find is what Nornir gives you is it allows you to have what's called an inventory file, which will be read for you automatically to do this loop for you. So you'll find is you don't need to do all this. What Nornir does is it simplifies things. So you no longer need to put in the for loop. So it does a file for you. It also does a loop for you. So you can go around multiple devices, which is really neat. So it saves you writing all the code. You could do it, but Nornir will do it for you. But then, even better, it does parallelization. So if you look, when I did the example for router in, router 10, router 10, 11, 12, what was happening is it did this one first, then this one second, obviously, and then this one third. So the telnet example that I gave you, it telnetted to the first one first, and then once that had finished, it moved on to the second one and then on to the third one. With network automation, speed is sometimes an issue. You can find that your scripts take so long to run, a lot of it can be about tuning. So rather than doing it in order 1, 2, 3, what Nornir allows you to do, for example, is it allows you to do 20 connections at the same time. Now, in Python, you could do all that, but Nornir does it all yourself. So why do it yourself when there's a library that does it all for you? It gets even better. What Nornir does is it will use Netmico if that's what you want. But it can also use napalm if that's what you want. Yeah, it can use different connection methods. So here's your automation server. You're running Nornir. By the way, this person here is called a Norn. It's from Norse mythology. This is another Norn, and this is another Norn. Most people will think that's called Norns, but the plural of a Norn in Old Norse is Nornir, and that's where the name came from. I don't know why the Norns, but anyway, that's where the name comes from. So with Nornir, what we have is an inventory file. These files are YAML files, yeah, which we like, or you will like once you get on network automation. So for example, what I've got here is a host file. So the idea is router 1, router 2, router 3. This is just like the Ginger 2, but Nornir isn't doing the configs with Ginger 2, although it does support Ginger 2 if you want. But here's the host file, and here's different variables that can be used for that host file. How do I connect to that device? But it gets even more sophisticated. What you can do is place your routers into groups. So you can have Cisco routers, and here's my Juniper routers, and you might have different username passwords, or what you might have is different NTP servers depending which groups are in, and you can always have default variables that are used throughout. So in our class, we always use this username password just to make things easy. Therefore, it's a good default. So Nornir does the file handling for you. Now let's look at the code. If we look, these 3 lines are the libraries. So you should be thinking, well, we don't really need that code too much. Yeah, okay. Because that's just saying I want to use somebody else's code. The real key to all this just initializes Nornir. So that line's always the same. So all we've got here is this one line, which is show IP int brief, which is pretty neat. Now, what this will actually do, if you remember, we had a telnet line, the telnet code was loads and loads and loads. It had 4 loops. We had to worry about doing terminal length 0 or anything like that. Here, all I'm doing is I'm going to use Netmico, and I will do a show IP int brief. Yeah, many times. Let's have a look at some code. So if I go to Nornir, and this code will work. I always love smoke and mirrors. I'm actually in the directory for this code to work because the code is not brilliant. So for example, here's my host file. So my host file, I've got 1099.99.11, 1099.99.12, and 1099.99.13. I've also got a 1099.99.44, but all of those map onto the devices that I'm actually managing. This one I know is 44. So here's my host file. I also have this sandbox device, which is a dev XE. This is an iOS XE device. So no, that's what I called it, dev XE1. Yep. The groups, I've got an iOS V group. So anything in iOS V can have NTP servers set to that. It could be based on regions. Juniper devices have this username password, which is different. And this is the real username password actually for the DevNet devices. which is pretty neat. Here's our normal username passwords. You can sort out encryption, all good things like this. And then when you realize that Nornir actually is very much like Ansible, I can actually use Ansible inventories as well, which is really neat. So the way I often describe Nornir is a Python library to enable Python to do everything Ansible does. But all of these are in an inventory file. But what I've got here, I've forgotten which ones I'm going to actually show you. Rather than all of them, I will get there. So I'm going to run number 3 here. So here's the code. What I've got here is the libraries, lines 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the libraries I'm going to use. I then initialize the library. I then actually, in this example, I'm actually not going to run it on every single device. I've actually got a filter here. So what I'm going to do is only run it on the iOS devices. If I go to the groups file, what are the iOS devices? The iOS devices, sorry, are in the host file. Yeah, okay, it's router 3 is in the iOS group, router 2 is, and router 1. So I'm only going to run it on 11, 12, and 13. So if you look at this, this is pretty easy code to say, I only want to run it on those, and I'm going to run show ver. So if I run this code, oh, sorry about that, misclick. Scroll back up. I'm going to run this code. And what it should do is loop round automatically for me 3 times. Yeah, which order did it do it in? It did it all at the same time if you were running Wireshark. And this is a show version of one of them. But this is router 3. Here's router 2, the show version. And here's router 1. Now, the beauty of this is as well, I can have this as a dictionary, and once I've got it as in a dictionary, I could pull out just the version number if that's what I so wish, and then I can check all my devices are the same version. Look at this though, it's just this one line of code that is looping around multiple devices. Yeah, where I'm doing the show ver, it could be any command. So it's Netmiko running, connecting to all these devices. And this is what Nornir does for you. It really simplifies everything. So where have I got show ver, any command that you want on all your devices or groups of devices. So this is running on a group, whereas the slide was actually running it on all devices. I could have done it on all devices, but then we would have got a lot of errors. I could have done show IP int brief. Let's look at how easy it is to change that particular code as well. I'll just quickly change this code. Rather than show ver, I want show IP int brief. It's called, it doesn't matter, I'm changing the code. I shouldn't really just change it like that, but why not? Yeah, so shows you how easy it is to do programming. You just copy this code and look, here we go. Here's router 3. Here's router 11, router 1, router 2. Sorry, it skipped over. There's router 2 and there's router 3 down there. So it's automatically looping around them all and doing show IP int brief. I could put any command in there and it's going to go around all my devices. Hopefully that's a script you can take away and actually use. Yep. Right. But it doesn't just use Netmiko. I can actually use napalm. And in this particular case, so what am I doing here? I'm using a filter again. So this is only to work on the DevNet devices. And I'm going to use the getters, which is get facts and get interfaces, which is another example. So this is using napalm. So the beauty of Nornir is I can actually use napalm. So here's an example. I'm going to get the interfaces using napalm. Now, what that now means is this will work out whether to use the iOS or whatever. And if you look, here is the output. This is in JSON format, but that's what the napalm getters actually do for us. So Nornir really makes everything really easy for yourselves. Yeah, this is how simple the code is. Effectively, I would say the code is just one line. All of these will be exactly the same. So it's just this one line. In fact, all you do, change that command and you've got a piece of network automation that will go around and look at multiple devices multiple times for you. Right, okay. I did say I'd leave 10 minutes at the end, so it's always very short when it's only a couple of hours. But here's the key thing. Look, you can always come on training courses, but the idea is, if you want, where I find most people get bogged down as network engineers is what a lot of network engineers do is they try to learn Python, which is okay, but if you've never been a programmer before, I did 4 years of programming at university, 3 years, and then on the job training, etc. That is a real, if you know programming, that's fine, then by all means learn Python. But I think the best way is not to do that. But what I would do is just get on with some network automation. Now, you need to be careful. So note, test, test, test. Yeah, so always be careful. So do be careful. This is my get out of jail. So if you want to do it, I'd say rather than learn Python, what I would do is create a VM. You can create it in Azure. That's where we use Azure. You could use Google Cloud, AWS, whatever. Create a VM. We actually use a Windows one. You can use Ubuntu. Ubuntu is probably easier in some ways, but if you're not familiar with that, that's another learning curve. So create a VM and then install Python. So Ubuntu comes with Python already, but get that installed. If you're on Windows, get that installed. And then you install the libraries. If you remember, I've been showing you use other people's code, pip install. Now, rather than writing programs, which is what most Python courses do, teach you how to play hangman or do make a list of bananas or groceries, etc. What I suggest you do is start using example code from these libraries, you know, so whether the libraries are Netmiko, that's one that you probably will use. ncclient is another useful one. Napalm is another one. Or even you can jump in with Nornir. So these are 4 example libraries that you could be using. Get those installed. Now, what I also recommend is you install, it doesn't have to be EVE-NG, it could be GNS3. I went off that when it stopped working after a Windows upgrade. I prefer EVE-NG, which is a VM. There's an interesting one called Container Labs that I think was talked about by a guy from Nokia, I think. At the last LINX meeting. That might be an interesting one to actually look at, but get EVE-NG or something, or work on your own labs. If you've got real labs, get that all set up. And then what I'm saying is try it all out, test it, and work read-only first. So although network automation is really about configs, what I'm saying is in the first case, do your different reads, test it, and once you're happy, then you could let it out in the wild. On your real devices, carefully. Yeah, always be careful with network automation. It can always go wrong, so test it first, and I would definitely do read only. Once you've got all this, then you can look at automating lab configs, and around here I would start learning Python in more seriousness. You'll learn it as you go along, but if you keep going down this network automation steps, that's what you do. Now, don't forget, I've been assuming you're network people. What a lot of people have are programmers behind them doing the automation, which is absolutely fine. But what I'm finding is a lot of network people are wanting to get into all this, and that's why I'm recommending this actual learning curve. Like I say, there's a URL there if you want to come on a lovely course. Yep, right. I must warn you, a lot of this code in this course has been to simplify the code. It is not good code. So the code I've been showing you is not good code. I just need to point that out. So you need lots of error checking. So for example, I had some code that fell over. It wasn't neat. It didn't tell me why it fell over. I had to work that out myself. But that's what that's about. We've covered a lot of Python and a lot of libraries. And if you remember, I didn't cover Scapy. Scapy is a lovely one. This is basically Wireshark. It's a library that allows you to do Wireshark, i.e. sniffing. So it is Wireshark, but it's sniffing. It also allows you to do packet crafting. So if you're in security, this is quite a good library, but it's automation of pen testing, that sort of thing. But I did cover Napalm, I covered Netmiko, I covered Nornir, all these good libraries. So what I did say right at the beginning, bit of subliminal programming this, what we'll be covering in a 2-hour slot. So I'm getting close to the end. You'll almost be free to all go. I did say. What we do is talk about the 2 major ways to automate. So SSH, or we can use Netconf and RESTCONF. If you weren't all muted, I'd ask you what libraries we'll be using. I've already put those up, Netmiko, and I'm struggling for libraries now, Nornir most definitely, which uses napalm, but can actually also use ncclient. These are perhaps the main ones, but can also use Netmico. Yeah, okay, so those are at least 4. Yeah, we covered others. And what are the steps to do network automation? We'll start with reading and just try it all out. Yeah, but try it on test labs, whether those test labs are in emulators such as EVE-NG or whether they're in the real world, that's up to you. Anyway, hopefully you found that session useful. And there's a few minutes left if there's any last questions from anyone.
Thanks, Steve. That was really great. And thanks everyone for joining. Like Steve said, we'll hang on the session a little bit. Have got a question come in using the pipe command often in Cisco. Somebody's asked.
Let's just see. Yes, it can be incorporated in the script. So yes, no problems whatsoever. So just to put that into context, what's really neat, so I'm just trying to get an example slide that will answer that. The answer is yes anyway. So can you use pipes? Yeah. I will find some code. Where I did show IP in brief, we could have done show run. Yeah, okay. In these double quotes or single quotes there, you could put pipe include and then whatever you want. And this is pretty neat as well. So yes, whatever is allowed on the Cisco, you can use the pipe and then, you know, show run include whichever bit of the running config you want, BGP, etc. So yes, you can use whatever you can use on the command line can be incorporated there, including those pipes. So the answer is yes.
That's great. That's all been answered. We've got one more to take us up to 12 o'clock. Denson has asked where to get started with learning all the concepts covered and the tools, especially Nornir. Can you share a list of industry best practices for network automation? So if you've got anything quickly, if not, we'll make sure we include this in the follow-up email to you all, Denson. Thank you.
The best place is actually I know it sounds silly, but it is Google. But let me just quickly show you. Yeah, I am still screen sharing. So if I just if I Google Nornir, that will probably be good enough. So the best way is often it's read the docs, but I'd also search GitHub. Yeah, so search GitHub and Google. So if I look at the Nornir documentation, often you'll find, here you go. So you should recognize this code. So how would I start? I would look at examples like this and try it out. So if you want to get up and running, which I think is the question, how do you get started with all the concepts? Google for the actual thing, find code. And like I was saying on my actual slide, you actually want to just be doing it all. Yeah, so you can read and read and read, but a lot of people get bogged down with trying to work out what every single bit of Python does. As long as you're working on non-live kit, i.e. your EVE-NG labs, then what I'd say is just install the library that you want to use and practice with it. See what the different scripts are, and that's a good way to start learning Python. And then what you'll then find is you'll then want to pick up bits of Python, but it be directly relevant to what you want to do. In terms of industry best practices, that would be hard. I'd probably Google for that as well, is the quick answer. Yeah, so there's nowhere that I've got a list of industry best practices, although I would say a good practice is always test, etc. The other good practices are actually what I'd say is maybe, depending on the scale that you're doing it in, but if you're going to start configurations, I would make sure you've got some real programming skills behind you. The trouble is those programmers often don't have the networking skills. So ideally, you've got network guys that are programmers that can actually implement it on a large scale if you're letting it out to the real world, let's say. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. We'll grab a couple of those links off you and include that in the follow-up email to all our attendees afterwards. So that's great. Thank you.